All right, afternoon, everyone. I'm Ian Friedman, President of the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar. I'd like to thank all of you for being here, obviously for exceptionally important matter for what we do as lawyers and for what the legal community means to Northeast Ohio. So thank you for being here. I expect that there's going to be, I've been getting a lot of text messages from people saying they're still on their way. So as they come in, Jeff, are you going to keep that up, or it's probably not a good, you know what, we'll write it and we'll meet everyone up at the front and get them polling. So because we're going to be doing the real-time polling, we'll just have someone out there doing that. But this will be the first of several meetings throughout this important process. Jeff Applebaum, to my right, has been the team leader. I'm going to allow him to introduce all of his consultants, who are a fantastic group, and I thank all of you for being here as well. So it's an exciting project, and we look forward to hearing it. So thank you for being here.
Very good. I'll give you a second to make sure you have the information you need, and tell me when you're ready, and I'll flip the screen. You all set? Okay. Yeah, no, we'll stay here. And let me just make sure. Does everyone have this information? Okay. Okay, I got it. It's kind of oh, it's this way. All right. We all set? Okay. First of all, let me take a minute. Some of you have spent time with us, some of you haven't. My name's Jeff Applebaum. I actually wear two hats. I'm the head of our construction and development group at Thompson Hine. I'm also the managing director of Project Management Consultants, which is our wholly owned subsidiary that does project management, owner's representation for major community impact projects, such as stadiums, arenas, the convention center downtown, the Hilton Hotel downtown, and this project, which is the Justice Center project. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history, but before I do that, I operate in conjunction with the team that is responsible for helping us to program the facility. And I'm going to let my folks just go ahead and self-introduce for the team. Andy, you have a lavalier, right?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead, Andy.
Andy Couples, I'm the team leader for DLR Group for the overall project.
Hi. My name is Mohammed Hassan. I'm with DLR Group.
Mike Wass with Kitchell. We're part of the PMC Kitchell program management team.
Ken Jandora with DLR Group, Senior Justice Planner.
So we actually have a much larger group in our planning group. DLR is the lead in our planning group. Some of you have met Karen Chin with Chin Consulting. She, on the detention side, does our work in terms of looking at numbers, looking at figures, helping us to program. Pulitzer Bogart also does planning on the detention side, and Dan Wiley does planning on the court side. So it's a very large team. Let me tell you what we are going to do today. And I'm going to flip this. Well, that didn't work the way I wanted it to. I think some slides may not have gotten in here. So before I do that, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about what we have done up to date, and I'm going to lead up to that in a few minutes. We're really going to focus on the possible configurations of a new Justice Center, where it could be, what would be in it. We've been spending a lot of time on other issues up until now. I'll go over those a little bit with you briefly. And then at the conclusion of this, we're going to do a polling exercise where you're going to give us input into your thoughts about the project. I'm going to do this conversation that we'll have up here with Andy Couples. The two of us are going to lead this. What you will notice is that occasionally I'll let Andy talk. I'll mostly just interrupt him But that's the way that he's learned to do business with me, which is why he's my favorite consultant. So, a little bit of history that you may or may not know about our Justice Center complex. So, the first courthouse and jail is there on the left in Cuyahoga County, 1812 to 1830, just a small little house. The second courthouse was actually at the southwest corner of what is now Public Square, and that was there for 30 years, sort of an elegant building. The third courthouse, I get a kick out of this because I've looked at 4 different sites, and everyone says exact location unknown. Maybe it's still out there. But that was the third courthouse that was built in 1858. And then what happened, we had the fourth courthouse, a very elegant building, in 1875. Still, the materials I've seen say exact location unknown. I must be able to find that eventually. But ultimately, what occurred and the real courthouse that we know all about is what we now call the Old Courthouse that was built in 1912. Now that courthouse housed what we now know as the Common Pleas Court until the criminal division actually moved out. We actually split the civil and criminal division in 1931, and I'll show you where they went in a minute. Right now, that is still the home for the Domestic Relations Court, the Probate Court, and the 8th District Court of Appeals, as you all know. But what happened over on the left was in 1831, the county criminal courthouse and jail was erected. And that actually served until 1976, when the new Justice Center, or now the old new Justice Center, came into being. That was actually torn down in the 1990s. It was out there for quite a while on East 21st Street. And if you look at the building, it's kind of a classic Art Deco building. Kind of resembles in some ways the Justice Center with the tower and what's to the left of it. But the Justice Center was completed in 1976. Now, the Justice Center, just a little bit of information about it. It's 25 stories high, 420 feet. It has 44 courtrooms and 9 hearing rooms shared by the Common Pleas Court and the Cleveland Municipal Court, and has the Police Administration Building attached to it. And obviously, in back of it, when it was first erected, Jail 1. Jail 1, depending on how and when you looked at it, Jail 1 accommodated approximately 956 beds. Now, this is kind of interesting. If you go back to the history of this, in 1972, the budget was $62 million. It was completed in 1976 for $179 million. I've been asked if I manage this project not to do that again. But I will tell you that there's some justification for a little of that. The scope did change when the city and county got involved. The city got involved. There were some additions, the police administration building and some other things. But there were also very difficult issues with procurement that led to a lot of criticism, a lot of cost overruns. It is interesting because at or about the same time, the Sears Tower was completed. Actually, 2 years before that, 2.5 years before that, the Sears Tower was also completed for $179 million. Sears Tower is 3 times taller. Its volume is over 4 million square feet compared to under 2 million square feet for this. It was also sold 3 years ago for $1.3 billion. If we could find someone to buy the Justice Center for $1.3 billion, I would have many solutions for us. By the way, there's one interesting thing about the Sears Tower. Some of you have met Karen Chen, who is one of our consultants. And if Karen was here, she'd be beaming when I say this, because one of the issues about Sears Tower was how well it was managed. That whole project was managed by Karen, our consultant's father. In fact, there's famous videos about the project that talk about Phil Chen and how he did Sears Tower. So that's why I bring it up. From the get-go, there were operational and functional issues since it opened. Many of you have experienced what is in the building. In fact, if you walk there right now and walk into the lobby, avoid the barrels, which are catching the rain from the atrium. There's been water. This is an example of burst sprinkler lines. There's been leaking. There's been issues with the window wall, with the mechanical systems. issues with even the very expensive walls of the courtrooms with those slats, how people became ill when they looked at them and that had to be replaced, just all sorts of issues over time with the building. Jail 2, by the way, was built in 1995. It added 480 beds. At that time, it was $68 million as a cost. By the way, if you simply took the original cost of these structures and just converted them to 2020 dollars, not the dollars that, because if not 5 years from now, when or if they're replaced, their replacement, just to convert it in dollars, that would be over $1 billion for those facilities today, just to do that work. So a little bit more history. In 2013 and 2014, there were extensive studies, books this big, looking at every system in these buildings. At that time, it wasn't about program, it wasn't about what to do with the system. We didn't know about the issues in the jail that we have in the last year. It was simply about the mechanical system, the electrical system, the roof, the walls, and just to make it work, and just to allow it not to leak and the systems to work, how much would it cost without making one programmatic change, not changing anything about what's in the building, just changing improving the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, walls, etc. In fact, not even extending the life of the building in terms of its structure. And here's what was determined. Basically, and what those represent are the percentage of the value of the building that you would have to spend just to, with no visible change really, just to fix everything that was broken without changing anything programmatically. And basically, it was more than 50% of what was the value of the building to get that done. 2014 did a planning report just talking about, okay, how would we go about renovating it and what would we do? And basically what it showed was, depending on what you did, just to fix the buildings without changing anything programmatically would be between $300 million and $428 million. To say it a different way, if this building had been maintained from day one, if the roof system, the wall system, the mechanical systems, if everything had been updated and maintained properly, that expenditure would not have been required because everything would have been in real time brought up to speed. So that's just a cost, not to actually do anything programmatically to make the buildings better, just to make them work. At that time, a cost of a new building was unknown because that was not part of the exploration. Now, one more thing I will tell you. The planning report also said that if you think about what to do in the future, there was some planning, and it said, what would we have to plan for if we actually built new facilities? And this was an assumption. It was really interesting in the 2014 report. It said, look on the right-hand side, because at that point in time, our jail population had steadily gone up. Keep in mind, and this is, of course, something that our team has uncovered, in the last 10 years, the population of Cuyahoga County, as we know, has gone down. We hope it's stabilized, but over the last 10 or 15 years, it's gone down. The crime rate has gone down. The arrest rate, and we have some data issues because we don't collect very good data, but we believe the arrest rate has gone down. While all those things were going down, the incarceration rate has steadily gone up. Of course, this creates a whole series of issues as to why is that, and we've talked extensively about that. We'll mention that a little bit today. But at that time, the study basically said, well, you know what? We believe that by 2030, we believe that our jail population, if things didn't change, would get up to about 2,600. We have to plan for that in 10 years. And by the way, when we started this study and started this work just 3 or 4 months ago, when all this started to come to fore, our jail population was 2,300. For a jail that wasn't really supposed to hold more than 1,700. Now, you've read a lot about the issues and what's going on with that, and we still, are detaining someplace in the county about 1,900, it varies. It's a little down on the holidays. We put them in different places now, not necessarily in jail 1 or jail 2, but we have to accommodate all of them. So in any event, that was the assumption, that we would have to have a jail that housed 2,600 people based on the trends and based on that planning. Now, I'll mention one more thing. Every year something wasn't done, the cost of what you would eventually do increases. The construction cost, renovation cost, generally is about double the CPI. It leads inflation. It's a leading indicator, unfortunately. Right now, we are not quite as hot, but there are very hot markets all around us. Building in Columbus right now, very high costs. In this industry, in the justice industry, we have some very high costs. Hollow metal, for example, there are very few providers, very high cost. Our estimate and what has been happening is that really these costs are going up by about 6% a year. So let's just take that cost of what it would take just to fix things, and let's just use the number of $500 million because it's easy to calculate. If the cost goes up 6% a year, every year you wait to do something, it's going up $30 million. That's not the biggest cost that's going up. We're going to show you the biggest cost that's going up because of inaction in a few minutes. So in any event, and now I'm skipping a whole lot of stuff. I'm not going to talk to you about all the issues about what happened since that study. As you may know, and as I think you do know, what happened ultimately, a steering committee was formed. There are 12 people that make decisions on this committee. It has been meeting. They must make decisions by a 10 to 12 vote. They're all public officials with a fiduciary responsibility as to what occurs. We hired our programming team. We've been working on this. We've now been working studiously on this for several months, just doing huge amounts of data collection, interviews, information gathering, physical inspection. So what I'm going to do right now, before we turn to today's topic, I want to tell you about 3 things that are going on right now that are really not the subject of what we're going to talk to you about today, but you should know that they're going on. So when we first met with the steering committee, after we did the information gathering, the immediate thing that we talked about for the jails was jail population. We believed that it was basically insane to think about building a jail that holds 2,600 people. That's a massive jail. Planning for that didn't make sense because we don't believe the jail population should be that high. As a matter of fact, as we started to investigate our current jail population, we realized that our current jail population should be nowhere near as high as it is. And we started to investigate the jail population. Now, a lot of this is already known to many of you. But as we started to look at it, and really did the deep dive, we learned that there were all sorts of issues why our jail population is too high, things that have to be done right now, let alone planning for the future. And you're all pretty well versed in this stuff because it's something that the bar cares about, but you know the different topics. Bail reform, the fact that we have people in jail simply because they cannot make low dollar value bail, and the need for bail reform and everything about that, which we've spent countless meetings talking about. Diversion, the fact that, and we've done the studies, that right now there are between 900 and 1,000 people right now in that jail where their primary issue is SMI, serious mental illness. They're in the jail because, frankly, there's no better option for them, or at least no option that's being pursued for them right now. If they are picked up, the police, what do? There's no really good diversion facilities. They can drop them off at the jail. They can be gone in 15 minutes. It's somebody else's problem. A huge problem, and of course, once they get there, the amount of time they stay there is excessive. Because once they're there, they don't have their normal medication, they don't have their normal care, they linger. And we have the data and the statistics to show how bad that is. And then there's a whole series of other issues involved with the failure to have central booking and a whole series of things that that have taken hours of our conversations, and some of you have been part of them. It's not our topic today because we're turning to something else, but we want you to know that that is all happening. And as part of this investigation, there's 3 agenda items that we are working on. Number 1, there's a diversion initiative. We have studied the population, and there'll be a report this month that shows exactly how many people, if we had a good diversion alternative, how many people would not be in that jail right now and how many would be prime candidates for pre-arrest diversion. The idea would be that police, when they identify these people, would not take them to the jail, they would take them to a diversion facility. And we are right now on on this basis, we are right now finalizing the study. There will be an RFP, we hope, that goes out that details everything that we think should be in a diversion facility. We have vendors in town, and I shouldn't say vendors, but they're institutions in town, hospitals and others that are interested in providing services, and we're trying to see how quickly we can specify that and get these diversion facilities set up. There is funding for these things. There's different ways in which the capital expense may be funded. There's different ways in which the operation expense may be funded, and because these are pre-arrest facilities, it is also something that could be subject to Medicaid payment. So that's one topic, not for today, but I just want to let you know that's all happening. And we have had diversion meetings on this, and you know, the bar associations, there are bar members that are in it. There's no formal committee, but that is continuing as an effort. The second effort is to do central booking right now. Central booking will be a critical part of any new facility, but on a temporary basis, we want to create a central booking facility right now, because no matter what we do, it's going to be 4 or 5 years before we have a new jail or renovated or whatever we do. So the idea is to have central booking right now. We are in the process right now of developing what that central booking facility will be like. We hope to put an RFP out within a week or so so people can look at it and propose on constructing a temporary central booking facility right there at the jail right now. We are talking to the key players about how that would be staffed and how that would operate. Not only would it have some good immediate results, but it then becomes basically we watch and see how it operates because it's the model for what we will eventually do on a larger scale. There's also funding that may be available for central booking, and so that's the second initiative. By the way, I want to go back to the first one on diversion initiative. That initially started out looking only at the SMI population, seriously mentally ill. We're expanding that to also talk about those populations that require detox, SMI and detox, and perhaps also the pure detox opioid area. So those are all under consideration for that. The third thing is a population management committee. There have been all sorts of initiatives about ways in which to bring a series of population management in the jail initiatives together. The one thing that is recognized is this has to be coordinated county-wide. It's not just the county, it's not just the city, the municipal courts, it's all the police forces and all the municipalities that eventually may get and become part of this, and we're talking about how that would be managed. Those things are all going on. And there will be meetings that you will be invited to address all of these topics, but it's not today's topic. So I wanted to get through that pretty quickly. And I'm actually going to let Andy talk for a minute. Where we have been on the issue of the courts and the jails. We have done extensive work, programmatic work, to determine what the future need of the county is with respect to courts and jails. And we know programmatically what is required. And what you see up here is the current program for any new or renovated courthouse. Andy, why don't you take a second and describe this, and then I'm going to talk about the constraints.
Okay.
So you talk about the program, and I'll talk about what cannot be changed and why on this.
We basically are projecting 53 courtrooms. That's because this will be both Court of Common Pleas General Division is included, Municipal Court is included, and Domestic Relations Court. So as Jeff will talk about in a moment, it's one courtroom per judge is required by standards. 25 hearing rooms and other litigation spaces. So we're going from about 53 spaces now to a total of 78 litigation spaces for 99 judicial officers. Magistrates and some others will be sharing hearing rooms. One of the big impacts on this is domestic relations because none of those the magistrates in domestic relations currently have a litigation space. They're actually doing litigation in their chambers and settlements. Probably one of the least safe and secure environments we could ever provide for that court. So we're looking at a need for about 725,000 square foot usable square feet. You know, that's a space that's actually usable. That doesn't include elevators, mechanical rooms, and other things, which is an increase over what's there now of about 134,000. That's primarily driven by the need for more hearing rooms for domestic relations. I don't know if you're aware, most of your prosecutors are sitting 2 people to an office plan for 1. So there's really not even confidentiality for each individual prosecutor. Public defender is in similar straits. So a lot of this is about getting people back to standards because since 1976, as things have occurred in the justice system and programs have been added and staff has been added, no real space has been added to support the justice system. It also assumes in the program that all of our courtrooms would be brought up to current standards in terms of accessibility, in terms of seating, in terms of use, in terms of configuration.
Technology.
Of course, technology. So the program's based on bringing everything to standards. That's why there's a difference in the area. As you'll see as we go through alternatives, some alternatives which may include renovation may require a compromise of those standards, simply because you're using what you have. So this really reflects what the program would be for a new courthouse if it was totally built new to today's current standards. For example, just from the attorney's perspective, every courtroom comes with a pair of attorney-client witness rooms, so that there's a place to actually meet. Every holding area comes with a secure visiting area at the courtroom. The holding areas now, which can only hold 2 people for 2 courtrooms, are expanded so that the court can be more efficient. I know that there's many of you, I'm sure, in the criminal bar and the public defender that's had to wait for somebody to get to the courtroom, which delays the case. So there'll be more holding capacity. That's what's driving that area difference. And again, as I said, this is based upon current standards for a new courts facility. Jeff?
Now, and of course, there's all sorts of information about what should be in the court and all the programs, which we've spent a lot of time on. We don't have time to get into that today. But there's a lot of questions about this. People have said, well, why that many courtrooms? What are you predicting for the future number of judges, et cetera, et cetera? So here are the givens. Number 1. The number of judges is not set and cannot be set here. We have no opinion on that and can have no opinion. The number of judges that serve in Cuyahoga County is set by the state legislature, and it is set based on advice from the Supreme Court. Now, our program says, however, if that should ever change, our program changes, because on the courts, everything is driven by the number of judicial officers. So that's the first piece of it. Number 2, the Supreme Court has rules of governance. There are other states that have different rules of governance. Some states permit courtroom sharing or facility sharing. Our rules of governance, which are what we must abide by right now, say the following. They say, number 1, every judge should have his or her own courtroom. They say every courtroom should have a jury box, which means every courtroom has to be jury enabled. It says that every courtroom should have its own jury deliberation room. So these are things that are right now set forth, and we are respecting them. Now, I will tell you, even though it says that, for example, the Domestic Relations Court have said We're not demanding or insisting or even asking for that because we don't do jury trials in our domestic relation courts. So they don't need them, they don't want them, which is understandable. By the way, those rules, and some of you went to another conference I did, and I asked you questions about what you thought were in the rules. They're a bit archaic. The rules also say that every courtroom must have a chalkboard. The rules also say that every courtroom must have access to a paid telephone. So it is possible that someone will look at those rules of superintendence sometime, and it may happen during our process, who knows. But for right now, we are respecting the fundamental aspects of those rules in this planning.
Jeff has talked about the jail, and the steering committee, after looking at that 2,600 bed number, looking at all the issues about what could be done, adopted a capacity of planning, maximum rated capacity of 1,600 beds, which means an average daily population of about 1,360, because you never really plan to be 100% full for classification, for maintenance, for other kinds of things. That is really what led to moving forward with all these diversion initiatives. I'm just going to add a couple comments to what Jeff said. The diversion initiative deals with taking somebody to diversion rather than arrest because we have a place to take them. We are still taking people into our jail for alcohol detox. We'll put them in a tank for 6 hours, then we'll release them. And that's really not the place to do that. It will also allow crisis intervention teams to decide if you're willing to go to the diversion center, we will give you an appearance ticket rather than arrest and processing. And thirdly, and this is part of central booking is not just about centralizing the service. And to be clear, no one's suggesting everybody's going to do that tomorrow. The city and the county are doing it already. We're allowing the option for any of the suburban municipalities to opt into central booking. But it will have a very, very robust pretrial release assessment program. Municipal court has dropped their jail population by 50% by doing pretrial investigations, which is really in line with Supreme Court's most recent recommendations of bail reform, the least restrictive method possible to assure appearance at the court and obviously protect public safety. Court of Common Pleas is going forward also with a pretrial investigation release program, which will change the roles of the bail commissioner and probation and how that works now. The goal being, where we're now putting somebody in on a minor offense with a minor bail that they still can't pay, to have an alternative. I would also point out, as background for that, if I may, Jeff, the municipal court has actually reduced their failure to appear rate because now people get text messages on their phone when they're supposed to be at court. They're using technology other than chalkboards to make the system more efficient. So that's what got us to 1,360 with a rated capacity of 1,600. But we always have to do with what ifs. What if the diversion programs don't work? Quite frankly, from my experience, sometimes if there is an error, that immediately crashes the entire program because nobody wants to do that again. So things get tightened up. So we're planning it with a core to allow it to expand to 2,400 beds. Ideally, and I think if these test cases prove out with diversion with central booking, we may actually reduce to 1,600 beds by the time we get to construction. And Jeff talked about inflation and the cost of construction. Over a 30-year period, regardless of escalation, you'll spend 90% of the dollars you spend will be operations. You effectively spend the cost of construction every 5 years.
We did a calculation, and keep in mind, remember how originally we told you the projection was build a jail for 1,600? So what this says is build a jail that the core, and those core services are not the most expensive things you build, and we're going to show you more about this. That is for your entry, your security, your food service, medical, et cetera. That's the core. That can be expandable depending on how you do it. It's the housing units that are expensive and variable. So build a flexible jail that could hold up to 24, but only build it for 1,600 housing units initially. If you have to expand it, you can. The savings between that in terms of operations and construction versus a 1,600 or a 2,600 person jail over 10 years is going to be over $1 billion. just to give you an idea of how significant this is. And we'll show you more about that as we get through this.
The other thing I'd point out on this, the usable area increases by almost a 250,000 square feet, and we'll illustrate why in a moment. Right now in the jails, everybody has to move somewhere for services. How many of the criminal defense bar have had trouble visiting somebody in the jail? That's because they have to have somebody operating a housing unit, somebody escorting that person, then somebody watching that person and visiting.
And we're going to show you that graphically.
Yeah, so that's why we've seen a huge increase. Sheriff's Administration, relatively flat growth. Again, most of this is simply getting rid of what's current overcrowding in terms of the delta. So where we're at right now is Dan Wiley, Curtis Pulitzer, Cheryl Villan have been doing our programming work, have met again with every component that's included, probation, prosecutor, public defender, common pleas court, domestic relations court, the clerks, to get us to a program we can freeze as a basis for studying alternatives, which basically tells us how big the bread box would be. And now we're going to look at ways that we would form that bread box and different ideas.
So
once we get to a point where we do very, very detailed studies and evaluation, the steering committee will be asked to come to a consensus decision of what is the best path forward. Whether it's renovating the existing facility, whether it's building a totally new facility or something in between, then we'll finalize that program based on what that alternative is, and that'll become the basis for moving ahead with construction.
So what you're now going to see is 9 alternatives divided up into 3 categories, and you'll see how it's done. The one thing they all have in common is that to the extent possible, they all attempt to meet the program that we showed you. The number of courtrooms, the intended jail population, the sheriff's space. Now, needless to say, some of what we show you will do it better than other methods. There's differences in cost, location, time, and we're going to show you all that. But it's comparing apples to apples in the sense of they all attempt to accomplish the same program. So with that in mind, I'm going to let you drive, and I'll just interrupt. So go ahead.
So what we're trying to do through this effort, from November to December and ultimately January 20th, we have a steering committee meeting December 18th to review what we're hearing from working groups. They'll have another month to deliberate. And in January, we'll ask them to narrow the number of options we're going to study in detail. Because quite frankly, it's very time consuming and very expensive if we're going to run 9 options, and many of them are just variations on a theme. But what we wanted to do was to first listen to what people have said, to make sure we tried to respond, and use these working groups to say, did we miss something?
So
We would not want to get to the end and have somebody say, why didn't you look at it?
So just to tell you where you are in this process, so these 9 alternatives, by the way, these were presented at the last steering group meeting, public meeting. We then have, we're doing a series of focus groups, working groups, of which you're one. So we have presented this information to groups of judges. So the common pleas court judges have looked at this and they've been polled. The domestic relations, well, those judges did it together. The municipal court judges have done it. County administration has done it. County council has done it. We've had separate meetings involving public defender, prosecutor, and we're still working through the list. But this is, our opportunity to talk to you about this, and to the extent that we can get your feedback, get your concerns, get your thoughts, and do the polling so we can at least get a sense of where you think you are on this. Now, I'm going to tell you, this can change tomorrow. I mean, this is what the bar says. What we're simply saying is, based on what you know and what you hear, what are you thinking? We'll do this again and over again. So there's no right or wrong answer. We're just giving you a sense of what we have. We're giving you our information and getting some feedback from you. So that's what the purpose of this session is.
And just one other comment. The Common Pleas Probate Court and Court of Appeals have opted not to be part of this project at this point in time, but they did show up for the focus group discussion.
Yeah, that's a little strong. The Domestic Relations Court has said they want to be part of a new building. The Court of Appeals has said, so far, when they first started out, they said they didn't think they wanted to be, but they're listening and they're participating. So they would say they are part of the process, and I think they're part of the process. They just haven't made a commitment as to what they want to do. Rose, you can talk to our judge at the probate court and figure out exactly what he says, because you work for him. So we'll let you take care of that. Go ahead.
Okay. So the options really fall in three groups. One, based on a lot of things we've heard, both from bar members and from judges. What if we could just stay on the site we have? You know, what would it take to renovate or expand, or just to stay where we're at? So there's a group of four options under there, which range from reusing everything, because I'm always asked by an elected official, well, these buildings are standing up, why can't I just use them all? So we put that in as an option for consideration, to rebuilding completely on site. The second group suggests, based on our experience, what if we decided to relocate the jail and build something other than a vertical stacked jail on a larger site? But we kept the rest of the courts and the Justice Center on the existing site. What would that mean? And then the third suggests, what if we continue operating what we have now, but concurrently build both a new jail and courthouse, either together or on separate sites?
And then move.
So that was really our range of.
Yeah. So once again, just to be clear, number one, everything is on the current site.
Or expanded site.
Or an expanded site, because that's a challenge. But it's on or adjacent to the current site. Number two, the jails are not on the current site, but the courthouse is in some fashion. And number three, we are not on the current site anymore, but whether we are on one site with a combined facility or two sites with a courthouse and a jail separate are all options in the third group. So now we're going to go down through and talk to you about what these options look like, what they mean.
Let's start with a couple common elements. One common element to all facilities, even if we stay on the current site, is jail 1 needs to be replaced. You'll see in a moment it's operationally inefficient, it's staff intensive, and it limits offenders' access to programs, whether it's recreation, visiting, medical, or other services. And related to that, jail 2 will require major renovations. Remember, these are buildings that operate 24/7 and get a lot of abuse over a 30 or 40-year lifespan. Another issue to always think about with jail 1 and jail 2, if you're not familiar with it, they're only connected on the 4th floor. So anything that moves between the facilities, whether it's food or laundry or staff in the case of an emergency, is going down elevators, across, and back up. So there are a lot of inefficiencies in that configuration of the two jails. So this is a typical floor plan for jail 1, and this is one of the things that, when we were asked, well, why jail 1? Why would we replace jail 1? Well, the first issue...
And by the way, before we do that, keep in mind, number one, the physical condition of jail 1 is awful. So if you wanted to if you wanted to renovate jail 1, and if you wanted to fix it, and if you wanted to spend about half the value of that building, a large amount of money, you could do it. At the end of the day, though, it wouldn't change what we're about to tell you. So you've already spent a ton of money, and you're still left with this. And now Andy's going to talk about the issue with this.
Jail 1 was designed with housing units of about 24 cells. So 24 offenders per unit. It can't be double celled because of the cell sizes and everything else with standards. There's been a couple, the program rooms that used to be there used to be a counseling room and an interview room and a classroom, have been converted to multi-bed rooms. So now there's about 26 to 28 offenders in each unit. Under Ohio standards, general population units can be as large as 48 beds. So what we're operating in already, and will continue to operate in, is what's called direct supervision. We have a staff member in the housing unit dealing with that population 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So each one of these housing units requires 5.1 staff just to operate the housing 24/7. That's three shifts, 7 days a week. So with vacation, with relief, with weekends, That's what the equation
Right,
ends up being.
and
So-
keep in mind, if you look at the building, because, when you look at it from the outside, that's what you're seeing, that's the structure. That can't be changed. I mean, that is the way the building is built.
So effectively, 2 of these units could be staffed by the same 5 people. So effectively, this floor plate doubles the housing staffing.
Of what it could be.
Then on top of that, we only have recreation on floors 7 and 9. So basically, you get recreation, if you're offered recreation an hour a day, it's at a certain time. You're taken from your housing unit, you're escorted to recreation, and staff is supervising you in recreation. So now you have the housing staff, the recreation staff, and the movement staff. And if you miss that hour, you don't get recreation. If for some reason you miss that hour because everybody's being moved to common shared facilities. The issue with visiting is visiting only occurs on 3 floors in the entire jail. So again, you're taken from housing, you're taken to the visiting room. We have supervision in both places. We have movement staff. And finally, all medical occurs on the 6th floor. So basically, everything in this jail requires the movement of an offender to a service, which limits the access to that service, as well as increases the cost of providing access to that service.
So keep in mind now, just to kind of emphasize this, so just go back one more second. Whenever you move someone is still there, has to supervise the housing unit. So now we have someone going with whoever they have to go with. They're traveling all over. You have that going on. And by the way, we call it direct supervision, but if you've ever actually looked in those housing units, it's not direct supervision of the personnel, it's direct supervision of doors. You really can't see very well much of what's going on, and the space is very poor space. We're going to show you now what a modern, efficient jail looks like with much better housing.
Before we get to that, all this ends up talking about operational savings, but the bigger issue here is one of human capital and access to programs, access to outdoors, feeling the sun on your body. And it's not just the human capital of the offender. Staff live here 8 hours a day, and they serve a life sentence. Remember, most folks in the county jail are there maybe a year or so, or a few months. Maybe there's some cases that run longer, but it's a relatively short duration, whereas the staff serve a life sentence 8 hours a day. And it does affect wellness, it does affect your outlook, it does affect how well you can do your job.
Which also affects safety, security, and the issues that you've been
As does
seeing.
movement. So this is what the program's based on. This would be a 48-bed housing unit, but at that house, every housing unit has a recreation area. And effectively, rather than moving people and saying you get recreation from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock, with behaviors, well, I simply unlock that door and now the offenders have a choice of being in a day room, their cell, or outdoors. It helps to basically reduce the apparent density and the people getting in each other's face. It's been proven to reduce offender-on-offender incidents and offender-on-staff incidents, just based on the quality of the environment and the ability to get away.
They can congregate as they like, where they like, all under direct supervision.
Yeah. Every housing unit would have a small medical exam room. So rather than move everybody for sick call, and quite frankly, when you do sick call centrally, everybody wants to go because they get to get out of their housing unit for an hour. The nurse would now come here for initial sick call, and if it's simply an aspirin or it's something that can be taken care of, it would be taken care of there without moving the offender. If it's something which requires more treatment, they would then be moved to central medical. It comes with program rooms so that we can deliver programs right at the housing unit. And it comes with a video visiting area, which includes both general video visiting as well as a private room that can be connected into by the public defender or by the bar. And typically that's put on a separate system so that there's no recording of that system. So that basically we really only move somebody if they need serious medical treatment. And we do have a medical mental health beds as well programmed. So if it's a serious case, they're not going to be in a general population housing unit. They're really only moved if they're going to go to court or they're going to be released. Everything else is delivered, which means the one staff member I've assigned to this housing each shift is really responsible for the whole range of activities. And again, you can get an idea of the quality of environment, the access to an outdoor area. You can get more recreation, get more physical activity. Probably the worst thing in jails that affects behavior, that affects incidents, which unfortunately affects suicides, is lack of anything to do. Just sitting there day after day after day. So we took a quick look at what that meant. Right now, Jail 1 and Jail 2 has 66 housing units in total, just general population and special. The program calls for 41. And so this is just housing staff. This doesn't include the movement staff or separate staff for recreation or for visiting if you do in fact get to see your client. Just at the face value of the program, based on housing only, which is a pretty straightforward equation, it saves 127.5 positions in the day-to-day operation of the jail.
So I didn't know what to do exactly with this because we have done calculations and we haven't yet released all of this information yet. But I will tell you in some form exactly what these savings are, just not on this slide. So go on. It's significant.
Now, the other thing in both of these jails, when they were built, the rec supervision was new. It was something people were adopting. So in most cases, people put in a floor control room to back up the staff assigned to the housing unit. We don't do that anymore because it's been proven to work, that it works on an interpersonal relationship basis. Correctional officers would have body alarms in case there's an emergency. And I've actually been in jails when a body alarm gets pushed. And it's amazing the response you get, from the team that's coming to the officer's aid. So we would basically, the outer door of housing would be controlled by main control. Anything inside is that officer's responsibility. And that's also an important management concept that the staff know, or the offenders know that the staff in here control everything. Many times when a control goes to an outside control room, they figure this guy, the person running the unit, doesn't have any real responsibility anyway. So it again is part of the management philosophy. So in this case, just from those control rooms, we're looking at a savings of 68 positions. And then finally,
I'll
go ahead.
I'll
You
take
got
this one. I'll take this one. So here's the bottom line. First of all, right now we operate 2 jail facilities that with a new jail we wouldn't need at all. Our annual cost to operate those facilities is $9.9 million a year. We spend $10 million a year on those facilities. We wouldn't need them. Right now we have out-county placements. To get the population of the jail down, as you've seen, we've been sending some folks to some other places, like Cuyahoga County and other places, just because our population was too high. That right now is, costing annualized, it would be around $2.3 million a year. We don't need to do that. If you take the first 2 numbers, and I won't get into the details, but you take those numbers and you add the possible and probable savings annually by having a new modern jail, the range is going to be not less than 20 million, not above around 31 million, but really we're targeting this at around, we think it's around $27-28 million a year. That's what you would save if you went from a high-rise, inefficient jail with all this movement to what is now a contemporary sort of a jail facility.
And you
It's
follow
just an
through-
operation cost.
And you follow through with the population management initiatives. That's
Because it still means that you drive that population down to that 1,600 number, which we think should not even be a challenge. Now, it should be done. So let me just show you something else. Cost of a new jail of the type we're talking about, and we'll tell you more about what that would be like, an efficient jail, somewhere in the vicinity of $300 to $400 million, high number, but that's what it costs to do this properly, exclusive of land cost. You can make some assumptions as to what you would have to do to pay for that. AA tax-exempt bonds. I've just done an example here. Right now, interest rates somewhere between 3.5% and 4% if you issued them. Including the issuance cost, the debt service would be somewhere from $17 million at 3.5% to $24 million at 4% and $400 million. So the range would be $17 million to $24 million with the higher interest rate and the higher project cost. That would not be the savings that we're talking about just from efficiency, $27 million a year would be realized. It would easily pay for the actual cost of that facility, particularly over 30 years. If over 30 years you were 2 or 3 million ahead of it a year, you would actually have money left over for some other things. So the idea of what you could gain by having an efficient, proper jail without all this unnecessary and counterproductive movement is pretty extraordinary.
Effectively, the savings in the jail would pay for over 50% of the cost of the entire project: courts, office space, and jail. So that's kind of the background on that. We validated this with rules of thumb and other facilities that have been larger facilities with staffing plans. We think the savings is realistic. Obviously, this was one of the questions that we got from county council and county executive as we prepared to look at alternatives to make sure it was doable. Some of the other common elements is a sheriff's admin would go with the jail. Everything that's off-site now would be consolidated as part of the courthouse complex. Public defender's offices, probation offices, other things that are in other space. There's a lot of stuff in Courthouse Square that would come back to the site. Parking is included in the analysis so that we don't have people parking down by the river and walking up the bank that work in the courthouse.
No matter what the site, we incorporate a parking component, or no matter what the plan is.
Yeah. But, and again, population management and emphasis is diversion is important. And right now, today, none of the alternatives are site-specific. They're more about, do we reuse what we have or do we consider moving? And then the questions will be, what are those site criteria?
And we're going to be asking you some questions about that shortly. So you'll see how this all fits in a few minutes.
So with that, and after we break up today, the boards out in the lobby have all the graphics I'm going to show. This whole presentation is on the county's website on the alternatives.
The parts are, parts aren't. You will eventually have everything. Let's just say it that way.
Yeah. So in terms of staying in place, we looked at a range of alternatives from maximum reuse. Everything that is there is reused, even the old police administration building, which is in pretty sad condition. The domestic relations would remain in the old courthouse. We'd solve the problems to the level we could. There is some flex space in the old courthouse, which potentially could be reassigned for other uses, through full replacement on site. So I'm going to kind of just walk through these in terms of what they would be from phasing. Yeah. And as we do the first one, the other ones become fairly similar, with just different advantages.
And I think what we're going to do, Andy, because of we have a lot of text, we're going to look at it graphically, okay, and then we'll explain the key points together because the text is too difficult to get through.
So we won't go through all this text, but basically, the first thing we would need to do is assuming we're keeping jail 2, we'd have to acquire a site for jail expansion which can be connected to jail 1. Or excuse me, to jail 2, so that it still operates as a single facility. We still only have 1 kitchen, 1 laundry, 1 main control, 1 central booking and intake area. This block is simply the potential mass of what that could be, whether it's horizontal or vertical. So it is a big, just to give an idea of the mass of what that would be.
Yeah, so once again, just to be clear where we are here, on this option, we are reusing everything, and we're also keeping the domestic relations court in the old courthouse on this option. But that's not where this box goes. What we're saying is something of that volume has to go somewhere contiguous to jail 2. So it's got to go there, or there. And what we're also saying is the volume of whatever you put there, that box represents the volume. So that box in some configuration has to fit next to jail 2 in order to do this, because you can't use jail 1. It's just impossible to use jail 1. So if we want to keep the jail on the site, you have 2 options. One is to put that box somewhere.
And since jail 1 is the piece that will be replaced in any option, it's obviously the first piece to be built because we get it out of the way. The reason the park and the courthouse square site is shown is we'd either have to acquire additional land for parking or potentially under the park do what we've done behind the old courthouse with underground parking. Because again, we're trying to make sure every scheme has some kind of a solution for parking long term.
Now, let me just, another couple statements about this box. So jails are extremely heavy buildings, as you can imagine, the concrete, the steel, et cetera. Any box like this that you put on this site, because this is an urban site, not a lot of space, it's going to be a vertical jail, many stories tall. That means the following things. Number one, it means it's going to, from a construction point of view, it's got to be on deep caissons. We have glacial till downtown. We have 200 feet to bedrock. Very expensive construction to put in caissons and put a jail on that kind of a building. So any vertical jail is going to be 15 to 20% more expensive than a horizontal jail that might go somewhere else. That's point number one. This, and it also has elevators. The other thing that you will hear if you talk to the warden, if you talk to the sheriff, if you talk to the director, they are not fans of vertical jails because they don't like the vertical movement. They don't like the elevators. They think there's safety, security, and other issues. Obviously, the kind of jail housing unit we're talking about that would have recreation with each unit, you can do it. It's challenging to do a vertical jail. The most important thing in my, to think about here, though, is we talked about when you see another alternative, which is a campus jail. It has a central unit, and then you can put, and you'll see, you can put housing units around it, and you can have as many or as few as you want. So you could start out with less, and if you found you needed more, you could expand. The issue with a vertical jail is you build it one time and you build it for the maximum of what you think it has to hold. So unlike building a central core that could have 2,400 but only build out for the 1,600 housing units that you want, for this kind of a building you have to build a core and shell that's capable of having all of that 2,400, even if you never use it, because if you ever, otherwise, if you ever did have the expansion, you'd have no place to expand. By the way, if you don't use that space, there's no adaptive reuse for a jail. I mean, if you don't use that space, you don't use that space, it's wasted.
And as we talk about this, we'll be throwing out some of those things, but once alternatives are selected, every one of those issues will be quantified for comparison for the 3 to 5 alternatives we narrow it down to. Related issue is, just in terms of starting this project, the jail's 4 to 5 years before we touch anything else, till we build a jail and demolish jail 1. After we demolish jail 1, we would construct our courts addition for that shortfall in space that we talked about. But again, in this case, the shortfall goes down a bit because domestic relations would stay in the old courthouse. This was, again, use everything we've got. Then the final phases would be renovation of all the existing buildings once we had some swing space to move people around. And again, we would not have enough swing space to fully vacate the courts tower, so that renovation would have to be 2 to 3 or 4 floors at a time as we go through it. And I think it's important when we look at that courthouse and where we are today in terms of how you all practice versus where they were when they built that courthouse, we'd basically be doing a major renovation of everything in that courthouse functionally. So we do have advantages and disadvantages, and this will be in the website. Jeff's talked on some of these. Obviously, we gain the advantage of getting out of jail 1 and getting operational savings from it. We maintain a consolidated justice center on the existing site, which has been a concern. But there's a wide range of major disadvantages, and probably a couple of the biggest are programmatic compromises, because whatever we would do with the courtrooms is based upon the module we have in the tower, and domestic relations staying in the historic courthouse. We also believe...
We're going to speed this up. Andy, We have more of a time restriction than I thought. We're going to have to zoom through the rest
Okay.
of this and get to the polling.
so-
So we're going to go really fast.
Really
through these.
fast. Let's-
Yeah.
I'll go real, so, and again, you'll see this similarly. All the on-site units probably have the highest comparative cost and the longest time to complete occupancy of the project.
So keep in mind, if you do this, once again, you can't do anything until you build the new jail 1, then you get rid of the old jail 1, and then at that point in time, you can renovate or you can put your next unit there.
So the second option is very similar. The biggest difference is the addition's large enough to allow us to bring domestic relations on site, which gets out of the safety and security issues we have, but many of the other advantages and disadvantages are the same.
These are the highest cost options because number 1, the vertical jail is the highest cost option for a jail. Number 2, renovation is more expensive than build new, and because it takes so long, because you can't start the courthouse until you get done with the jails. If the jail takes 4 to 5 years, you don't even start the courthouse or whatever you're going to do until you're 5 years out, and it extends the whole project maybe 8 to 10 years. And the longer the duration of project, the more expensive it is because you're keeping people out there, but also you have escalation.
And then I'll just run through these quickly. 1C says we're not going to buy new land, we're going to keep everything on site. Because we were asked that question also. Basically, the only element that could be taken down, still allowing the jail and the courts to function, would be the old police administration building. So that becomes the jail site. About a 16 to 18 story jail on Ontario connected to jail 2. Then we tear down jail 1, expand the courts, and then we renovate the courts tower.
So once again, 16 to 18 story jail on Ontario, which some people would have an issue with. But also, by the way, 16 to 18 stories takes out your view plane from the courts, but also now you have a massively tall vertical jail, very expensive, and you have the movement issues and other issues. And you have to build it that big, no flexibility.
Yeah. And again, we have high cost and long time to occupancy. The other option is full replacement, which simply makes this block big enough to replace both of these. But that does give us a much better site to plan for the future. We've talked about 8 courtrooms per floor instead of 4 in terms of efficiencies and other things that could be gained. And then we would remove the jail tower and have our front door lobby still off of Ontario.
Once again, you can't start that process until you get done with all of the jails and everything else. New courthouse may be more efficient. It would be on the same site. You'd be 5 years out before you'd even start to think about how to do that. Or you'd actually do it.
And there's a couple other disadvantages we didn't talk about, but the judges actually rated very highly as a concern, was disruption during construction. And just as a comment, when we demolish anything on this site, we're not just demolishing that building, we're demolishing 2 levels below grade where the parking is, because we have to start with new foundations for the new building. So it's a fairly major demolition reconstruction process and project. So the next option is if we relocate the jail and then either renovate or rebuild the courthouse on the existing site. A couple examples. Philadelphia built a new criminal justice center, which I was fortunate enough to design, so I'm very proud of it. And at the time, they were going to put a pretrial jail behind the courthouse. The decision was made not to do that because of how many beds they could put here versus a site further out of town. It's about 20 minutes away. They move 600 inmates a day to the courthouse. They all go into a central holding in the basement. They're all there by 8 o'clock in the morning. We talked to the judges about doing a morning call and an afternoon call so we could move twice. Their culture is, no, we want everybody here in the morning. So everybody's there in the morning. It has visiting areas for attorneys. It has processing areas for people that are brought into custody. And then as a busload gets ready to go back, they just take them back. So it's full in the morning, and then they empty it during the day. Maricopa County made a similar decision. Lexington, Kentucky actually had the jail beside the courthouse and made a decision that they wanted more of a urban development economic approach from what their courthouse was downtown, and they wanted a low-rise jail outside of town. So they're dealing with transportation. Lexington also put in separate attorney video visiting rooms, which both the public defender, the private bar, and probation and or pre-sentence investigators can use so that they can mitigate travel time. So what does that mean? That means a site of about 20 to 20 acres, 15 to 20 acres. And as Jeff was pointing out, this is Essex County, which was built on an industrial site about 3 miles from the court center, 10 or less. This was actually a brownfield site, but you can see where they allowed for future expansion.
So you have the core, and then each of those housing units, you build, if you need another 200, you can build them right there quickly. That's where the money is.
We were at.
I'm gonna cut this one a little short for time. Go to the next slide. Go to the next slide, the transportation slide. I just want to tell you this. We did an extensive study of the cost of transportation. If we did it like other places do it, and you have the transport buses, overland buses that are built for this, the concept is that the corrections officers would do it. They would do the transportation from the facility in the morning. They would take them back during the day as the population is ready for it. These are not school buses. These are expensive, good buses that are made for this. Those correction officers, when they have other tasks, they perform in between. We did a study of actually what the cost would be to do a full transportation plan, and the answer is it's about $812,000 annually, which is a lot.
An important issue here, which come up in all of our discussions with the judges and many bar members, is, yeah, but what if the body's not there? Because we're having trouble getting them even when the jail's right beside the courthouse. One of the things we recommended, and the sheriff has concurred with, as well as jail administration, is corrections will have responsibility. So they'll get the court list, they'll get the people downstairs to transport holding into jail. They'll put them on the buses, they'll have them here by 8 o'clock in the morning. So they're rather than having, right now, a lot of transport is between the sheriff's independent law enforcement transportation unit and the jail. So this gives us single responsibility and people that are used to dealing with groups of inmates and that reflect what's trying to be created as a culture of care rather than a culture of custody in terms of how people deal with each other.
Yeah, we're going to get through the rest of the options in 6 minutes, and then we're going to poll, just so you'll know.
So again, in this case, the jail moves off-site. Concurrently, we tear down the police administration building. We start our courts expansion. When the jail's complete, we complete our expansion and renovate the tower. And this is probably in the mid-range of a cost and mid-range of a time, because we can at least start concurrently with the jail. Then the other choice is to replace in place. Now this we would suggest you build the jail and then you demolish all the jails and the PAB because you have more design flexibility in how the building goes together and how it works, and then you tear down the tower. But basically you'd end up with a new jail on a site remote from the courthouse and a new courthouse on the existing site.
So at the end of the day, you do have a new jail, you do have a new courthouse. The new courthouse is on the existing site. But once again, you can't start the new courthouse until you've completely completed your new jail, moved everybody out of the jail, demolished those buildings. So it's still an 8 to 10 year process.
So these are both mid-range options. So now I'll do my Federal Express one breath presentation for the rest, Jeff.
All right.
So new court jail facilities on a new site. It could be a new urban site, which as you'll see in a moment, it would take 2 to 3 blocks. Or it could be a new site which is a bit further out from the core, which we'll discuss, or it could be a new urban site for the courthouse and a new jail on a remote site. So again, there have been facilities developed downtown, but in most cases, as Wayne County is doing now, they're moving it pretty far out of the downtown. Wayne County is actually building out beside the Ring Freeway rather downtown where the jail and the courthouse is now. So again, we acquire a new urban site of 2 to 3 blocks, build a consolidated justice center, and dispose of the existing site. This starts to bring our costs down because of all the escalation, extended schedule, and all the unknowns of renovation that we would have to do in a reuse. Do a mid-rise on a campus further out. Again, land acquisition's an issue. The issue of leaving the Justice Center site and being right within 2 blocks of where you're at now potentially is an issue of concern. And then finally is to look at what if we got a new site downtown for the courthouse, and these are some examples, which are about 2 city blocks, and this would include all the courts, all the justice agencies, potential for probate and court of appeals, if as this develops, they have interest to all fit on it. So a new campus site for the jail, 1 to 2 city blocks for the courthouse, and then disposition of the existing site. So that gives us pretty much where we're at, Jeff.
So, yeah, so the concepts here are having the jails. We spent a lot of time talking about jails on the site because we wanted you to understand the issues there. Having a low-rise, efficient jail complex takes about 15 acres to do that. If you wanted to combine a new jail with a new low-rise courthouse connected, you're talking about 30 acres to do that. If you wanted to say, okay, we'll do a new jail, we want a urban downtown courthouse, but we don't want to wait on the current site, we find a new site close to downtown or very close to where we are right now to build that. That only takes, depending on what you're doing, maybe 5 or 6 acres to do that. Those sites could be found. And then you could start that immediately. Then obviously, eventually you demolish the site that you have, and that's used for other purposes. I will make one comment right now about property, then we're going to poll. This is something about property. We're not going to talk about specific property. We're not going to talk about what's out there and what's available or not available. But we're going to talk about criteria, distance. The presumption is no matter what we do, there'll be access to public transportation. There will be ample parking. It will have good highway access. That's a given. We wouldn't do anything that doesn't do that. Another point I would make, when I did the convention center and the convention center hotel, some of you know I got that deal to do the day after the development agreement was signed. The development agreement said what the site would be. The private property rights had not been acquired. Mrs. Fiore, who had the Sportsman's Cafe, appraised the day before at $375,000. The next day, her asking price was $10 million, plus the food service rights for the convention center, by the way. Now, we had to work through that. One difference here, we would probably not want to do it publicly, but the difference between that project, which is an economic development project, and this project, is eminent domain would be in play here if you had to. You could acquire the property if you had to. You have to pay fair market value, but it's not. This is on the other side of the Kelo decision, just for the lawyers who care about such things in the room. Okay, we're going to poll now. So I'm sorry we had to rush through some of that, but we're long-winded. Oh, by the way, these are just the criteria. Eventually, we're going to talk about all these criteria and asking the groups to talk about what is most important to you. You'll have time to do this later, but we're going to do some instant polling right now.
I think an important issue is the criteria really won't come into play until February, March, April as we start to narrow the final alternatives.
Okay, question number 1, and we're going to give you the report back to use. These are demographic questions because we're going to slice this data based on the demographics. Tell us a little bit about, of these categories, who you are. Primarily criminal with little or no civil, primarily civil with little or no criminal, or something in between. Whatever your practice is, just identify where you think you are on this scale. And by the way, this is just to get a sense. Don't worry about, oh my God, what if I'm 40%? Just for all these questions, do your best. Okay. By the way, you can see up in the corner how many responses we're getting. Push the button one more time just to make sure we're hitting it properly. Okay. All set? And so this is interesting because more than half of you identify as primarily civil with little or no criminal. This is mostly all about criminal, because those will be the most impacted by a lot of that we talk about, but we do have several here that have a significant criminal practice as well. How long have you worked as a lawyer in Cuyahoga County? We'll see if there's a young versus old bias. Okay. That's interesting. By the way, the judges are much different on this scale. Okay, so that gives you an idea there, how your spread is. So, your practice takes you either to the Justice Center or to the Old Courthouse. Does it take you there very rarely, if at all, occasionally, or routinely, frequently? How would you rate how often you actually use these facilities or go to these facilities? Okay, and about half of you say frequently. Only 10% of you say rarely. And I suspect the people who don't go aren't here. So that's interesting to see that. By my practice takes me to jail, what I mean by that is you have a reason as part of your practice to visit people in the jail, not where you yourself may end up. So my practice takes me to jail, rarely, occasionally, or frequently. And rarely would be rarely, if ever. And this is not unexpected, but 15% of you do say frequently, which is why issues about jail location, et cetera, and accessibility are important, particularly to you. Now, and I want to explain the questions before you vote on these. So let me kind of give this in context. The Justice Center Courthouse is adequate in your view. And this, I'm stating this as an affirmative statement for you to agree or disagree with. It's adequate in terms of its size, its configuration, safety, security, for its intended purpose. Do you feel that the facility is adequate with respect to such things as size, configuration? We're going to have another question about whether it's efficient and other things, but this is just adequate. Size, configuration, safety, security, etc. in your view. And this says you strongly agree that it is, you strongly disagree that it is, or something in between. Okay, and this is not surprising. Most of you find it to be inadequate, or you strongly disagree that it's adequate. Let me say it that way. Let's talk about whether it's an effective, efficient, and functional building. So the question here is the Justice Center Courthouse. By the way, I have taken the jail out of this because if you think that the jail is either adequate or functional, you don't get the vote. Okay, this is about the courthouse. The Justice Center Courthouse operates as an efficient, effective, and functional building. You either strongly agree, strongly disagree, or something in between. And this is even stronger in terms of disagreement, whether it's efficient, effective, and functional. Now, let's just talk about the courtrooms. Not the building, the courtrooms. Do they function to your satisfaction? Those of you who spend time in the courtroom. And by courtroom, I'm also going to include what's ancillary to the courtroom. It's the courtroom experience. It's whether you're in the jury room, where your clients may have to wait. It's the courtroom experience as opposed to the building. And the question is, the courtrooms in the Justice Center function to my satisfaction, i.e. operate in an effective and efficient manner. Where you go, where your clients go, how you meet your clients, how you try a case, how you have a hearing. And once again, very strong dissatisfaction with how the courtrooms operate and function. Now, before you touch a button, I want to explain this. So here you're going to rank. And I'm going to go through each one in case you can't read it. And what you do here, after I read the question, is you push the letter in the order of the priority. So what this says is, with respect to a new or renovated, and this is just about the jail, not the courthouse, rank what you think is most critical in terms of what we should be thinking about, the priority criteria. So the first one is the cost of implementation. This is what it would cost to build a new jail. This is what we would have to go out and get bond financing for. The second one is the total cost of operation and construction. What this says is you look back after 30 years and you say, what's the total cost to build it, but what's also the cost of operation versus what we save by doing it. It's not the first cost. It's what we call the final cost, the total cost. It's the all-in cost. But you may have a higher first cost to realize the total cost, if you gather that. The third one is how long it takes to get this done. We have some issues in our jails right now. And, how important is the criteria of how long it takes to get us to a different renovated or new jail? The next one, D, is achieving the program objectives unrelated to cost and efficiency. Put cost and efficiency aside, how important is it programmatically to get these things with the proper environment for everybody, to make sure that they are safer, they have access to justice? Forget about cost and efficiency, just getting the programmatic objectives for what a good jail should be. And finally, how important is it to maintain the physical connection to the courthouse wherever located? So rate these in order of what your priority is. What is the most important thing to talk about? The next most important thing, the next most important thing. These are the kinds of questions where the rubber really meets the road, because you have to differentiate you can't have it all. You can never have it all. You got to figure out what's most important. Anybody need more time? Okay. By the way, just so you'll know, because I don't want there to be any magic here, the way we do this is if you push something as number 1, it gets 10 points. Number 2, it gets 7 points. Number 3, it gets 4 points. 2, 1, something like that. So these are also ranked in such a way that being number 1 means something. It's not like 10, 9, 8, 7, in which case you wouldn't get much of a difference. Okay, and what we see here, and this is the total points. By the way, if 67 of you had put D as number 1, you would have 670 points just to get the feel of this, okay? So getting the programmatic objectives is the most important to you, followed by the total cost, followed by the cost of implementation and the time, relatively close. The least important one to this group is the actual physical connection. By the way, we're going to look at this because I guarantee you that of the 15% that are at the jail all the time, I'll bet you it's a higher than that, but we'll see it. You'll get the data. You'll be able to look at this yourselves, okay? This print is small, so I'm going to read them to you. A new courthouse, whether it is on a combined site, whether it's combined with the jail or not, how far can a courthouse be, whether new or renovated, for where it is right now? Obviously, 0 miles. By the way, the only choice you have if it's renovated is 0 miles. It's got to stay where it is. We're not going to renovate it and move it, okay? So number 1, it's got to be where it is. It's got to be on the current site. Can't go away. Number 2, it can be within 0.5 of a mile. We can build it new. There's some sites around Public Square. As you know, they're in play for some other projects, but that other project can't take them all. So there are potential sites within 0.5 mile, and that would be, to the back of Tower City. That would be to 12th and Superior. That would be to the lakefront in some area. Number 3, within 1 mile. That would be your distance, for example, out to St. Vincent's Charity Hospital or East 21st and Euclid. I'm not talking about any specific site. I'm just helping you draw the circle. It could be as far out as 2 miles. That would be the distance to East 40th and Euclid, or to Lorraine and West 47th, down beyond the post office, any of those areas if you drew a circle. I don't bother thinking about how far north it could be. within number 4, 3¼ miles. That's out as far as East 79th and Euclid, or it's out as far as Steelyard Commons. It's that circle. A new courthouse could be within 5 miles. That's the distance to Glenville, Lakeview Cemetery, or Lorraine and West 117th Street. Or a new courthouse could even be beyond 5 miles. Where in your judgment it should be, however, no matter what we do, combine it or stand alone, it can be no farther than what, in your view? Pick one of them. And there you have it. You really, really, really want that courthouse very close to where it is, although not necessarily on the same site. Although, once again, that's 35% of you. We have 10% that say it could be more than 5 miles. By the way, I should have said more than 5 miles on the west side or more than 5 miles on the east side. That may have been a difference maker. But that's how your thought process is right now. Now, I'm going to read this to you. This is an important question, but it's a little complicated. With respect to a new or renovated courthouse, we only have 3 or 4 more questions, by the way. With respect to a new or renovated courthouse, rank your most important goals or criteria in order of priority. You can only select 4 and put the most important one first, the second most important one second, etc. Let me read these to you so you see what they are. As with the jail, number 1 is the first cost, the initial cost to build it on day 1. That's what you'd have to issue your bonds for. Number 2 is the total cost after 30 years. So that includes operational costs. Number 3 is how long it takes to get this thing completed, either renovated or completed. Number 4 is minimal disruption to ongoing activities. If we build new someplace else and move in, that's minimal disruption. If we renovate floor by floor over time, that's maximum disruption. E, achieving the program objectives unrelated to cost and efficiency, the quality of the environment, courtroom features, just getting the program that what we need for a modern, effective courtroom. Technology. F, constructing a new facility. You just may say, I have a priority that we have a new facility. G, renovating the current courthouse. I may have a priority that says, let's just renovate it, no matter what that means. H, maintaining the current location. And I'm now, because you've informed me with your last graphic, I'm going to fill in 2 numbers on I and J. Maintaining a nearby downtown location, and I'm going to say that is within 3 miles of the existing courthouse, which means you're not walking if you're downtown, you're driving, but there would be parking, etc., and it would be centrally located, but 3 miles. Or maintaining a within downtown location, and by that I'm talking about immediate downtown, that's within 1 mile. That's within walking distance, like what you said, like what 38% of you said. Top 4 on this list to see where you're thinking. Everyone all set? Okay, E, achieving the program objectives. That's always important, is the first. J is maintaining the within downtown location. That's the mile, that's the close-in courthouse. And then there's several that are pretty close. B, total cost of construction, important. Maintaining the current location is only 18 points on this scale. So that's important to know. So as long as it's downtown, whether it's on that current location is not that critical to you. critical to some. So, okay, now, I think we have 3 more. Okay, we showed you 3 big groupings. By the way, let me tell you what our goal is. Right now, we have 9 things to look at. We need to narrow the list down to what we're going to look at. We need to take 2 or 3 alternatives and really drill into them. Okay, so we're trying to eliminate things that people have a consensus aren't the best choices. So right now, you get to pick one of these 3 groupings. What is your preference in terms of one of these 3 groups? Number 1, some way in which we expand, renovate, or replace a consolidated justice center on its current site. That means the courthouse and jail on its current site, which would mean a vertical jail either on the PAB site or adjacent. B, relocate the jail to a new site, but still either renovate or replace the courts on the current site. Or C, develop a new jail site and a new court site, whether they're combined or whether they're separated, regardless of where they are, but new sites for both. Pick one. And then I have one more question after this. Going once, going twice. It's got a vote. Any more? We got another one. Okay. Any more? 64 of you are voting. Okay, we'll call the question. Okay, so you see that 56% of you say new sites, 34% say new jail site, but do something with the court on its existing site. 10% of you say stay on the existing site with everything. Hold on a minute. 2 more questions. If the jail must be relocated to a new site, I kind of did this one, didn't I? Oh, no, this is a little different. If the jail must be relocated to a new site, what is your preference for the new courthouse among the following choices? Renovate and expand the current one. Upon completion of the new jail, demolish the existing jails and build a new mid-rise courthouse on the existing site. Build a new detached courthouse as close to downtown core, but as soon as possible, which means you can start them together, or build a connected facility as long as it's no further than 4 miles from downtown, but it could be 3.8 miles from downtown. So these are your choices. We're going to put a new jail someplace else. Which of those 4 do you prefer? I think I have one more after this one then. I keep lying, don't I? I have one more after this one. We have 61, we had 66 or 65 minutes, 62. If you're not sure if you push the button hard enough, push it again. Okay. I think we'll call the question with this. Interesting. Okay. That is interesting in light of the last question. I may re-poll this question. I'm not sure. I may try this one again, but maybe that is the answer that we're getting here on that one. Okay, now you got 2 choices. Pick 1 or 2. And then I'm going to re-poll the other question again. I want to make sure I got the right result on that one. You got 2 choices. Which is better? To have a connected jail and courthouse even if the complex is not downtown, i.e. within 25 blocks of the current location, or to have a downtown courthouse on or near the present site even if it's no longer connected to the jail? What's more important? To a group that's more than 50% civil lawyers, by the way. And I want to repull the other question one more time just to make sure that that was the result, only because it didn't seem consistent with the prior result. Okay, here's what we have on this one. Okay, and it is 81% of you are, and by the way, this is exactly the same percentage. Oddly enough, we polled the judges on this same question, the municipal court judges, and they were all 80-20. This one was 80-20 with every group, exactly the same way, which is odd. Let me pull, I just want to make sure on one question. Let me just repull one question, 1 second. Of course, this is not fair either because you already saw what everyone else did. Oh, how do I do it on this computer? Wait a minute. You know what? I'm not going to repull it because I don't want to destroy it. We're going to do this. We're going to give this to the bar, and we're going to ask you. We're going to have a few more sessions. We're going to have you do this in some fashion again, and you may actually do this for a larger group to give you the chance to pull again. But at that point in time, I think we're concluded. We'll get you the information. It will be parsed out. We'll stick around up here if you want to ask us any questions or have any discussion. We'll answer your questions. But thank you very much. This was very informative for us, and hopefully it was informative for you too.